In today's video, we're getting very practical. The top 5 things that made all the difference to my landscape photography. Well, not just my landscape photography, but my photography across the board. As you might know, I used to shoot for a stable of car and motorcycle magazines, so a lot of these things were learned in the early days of my career. So we're heading off to a quiet spot down the road where we can have a chat about these things which have made such a difference in my photography. Please remember, as always, if you enjoy this video, to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe if you aren't already. Every photographer, myself included, wants to take better photographs. Now, I've been shooting for over 30 years and I'm still enjoying the process of improving my images. So, like a lot of you, I scroll through photography books, Instagram occasionally, less so these days, but certainly certain photographers on YouTube, I follow their work, and I'm always curious to see how they're approaching a scene and how they're interpreting what they photograph. My first photography mentor was a fellow called Joe Richelieu back in 1986. I just had an article published in my favourite motorcycle magazine, and he happened to be designing a new layout for that rag at the time and saw my work and for some reason thought I had potential. We got to know each other over the next few weeks as he gradually wore me down and convinced me that I should not be in banking, but I should actually be a photographer. And thankfully he convinced me of that. But he gave me an immensely valuable piece of advice back then. Basically, he said, if you want to improve your photography, decide whose work you most admire and try to deconstruct why it is that their images are so appealing to you, and then try and emulate their work. Even copy some of their images if you need to, because over time your own style will develop until one day you'll realize that your photography is uniquely yours. So what he was basically saying to me was, it's fine to admire other people's work, it's fine to ogle other people's images, but really what you need to do is get out there and take lots of images yourself. And it's only through that process of taking lots of photos that your own photography improves. One day he gave me a particularly difficult challenge, and this was still while he was convincing me actually to come and work for him, but I was in banking and wanted a nice, safe, secure career path, so the idea of working for a fellow I'd only met a few weeks ago was kind of scary to me. But during that process he said to me, look, I happen to be friends with the managing editor of the stable of magazines where your article was published, and they have about 15 magazines, so let me give you a challenge, see how you go with that, and then maybe I'll suggest to him that he consider employing you instead. You'll feel a lot safer, it's a large company, it's owned by a national newspaper, so you really should be in photography. This is what you should be doing, you shouldn't be in banking, so why don't we try out this challenge? And so he gave me a roll of Kodachrome 64 film, 36 exposures, and he said to me, I want you to go away and try and take 36 publishable images of your car. In other words, I want all 36 images to be good enough to print in a magazine. Now, I was 18 at the time. I'd been shooting dirt bikes at the local motorbike track and landscapes anywhere I could find them. I'd photographed every sunset for a whole year, all 365 of them, so I was obsessed with landscape photography, and the idea of photographing a car, which I hadn't really shot before, not sort of deliberately, and doing a really good job of it was kind of frightening. But of course I was young and excited at the prospect of a new career doing what I really loved, so of course I took up the challenge. He wasn't terribly thrilled with my photos that I came back with, even though I was pretty happy with them. But as he said, he saw something in my work. He said, I see a lot of me in you at this age, and I really want to help you to go and pursue the thing that you should be doing. So he had a chat with the managing editor of the magazine company. It was called Sign Magazines. It was owned by a national newspaper called The Age, and he arranged for me to go and meet him. Now, before I met the managing editor, he said, look, bring along a handful of your best photos you've ever taken. I want to see what your work is like. So naturally I spent hours and hours combing through all my old prints and came up with a bunch that I thought would impress him. None of them really did impress him. He was quite blunt in his assessment of my photography when we met. But at the end of it all, he said to me, how much money do you make now in the bank? And I said, oh, $110 a week, I think it was back then. He said, all right, we'll give you $150 a week, you can start on Monday. And thus began the start of my professional photography career at the ripe old age of 18. Looking back at my early work, my photos definitely sucked. My compositions were wonky, they were ill-conceived, poor lens choice, shooting at the wrong time of day, trying to shoot cars in bright midday sun, which is the worst thing you can do for a car because it's basically a big mirror. Including things in the compositions that shouldn't have been there, and just not really having the patience to think through what I should photograph. I remember photographing a caravan once for a caravan magazine, and I must have taken 200 photos of that caravan in exactly the same spot, bracketing left, right and centre, trying every damn filter I could try without actually thinking about maybe I should move the camera over here a little bit, maybe I should get a bit low, maybe I should try different compositions, different lens choice. No, I just photographed the same thing from the same spot 200 different ways, 200 different shots. But the worst thing of all, like a lot of young people, was my impatience clouded my ability to see what needed to be seen. My impatience got in the way of assessing a scene slowly, carefully, and from different perspectives, different angles, considering what the light was doing, all that sort of stuff, thinking carefully about what was in my composition and how best to represent what it was I was actually trying to photograph. However, I did have the occasional flash of brilliance. And looking back now at some of my favourite images of that era, it really boiled down to me, it boiled down to those situations where I had a car to myself for a day or more. And so I was able to slow down without the pressure of journalists around or a deadline or a press launch, and just be able to actually spend time scouting locations, walking around the vehicle, looking at my environment, and just carefully considering how best to place my subject. In the early days of my photography career, and before I went pro, I shot thousands of images, and then after that, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of images. In fact, in one weekend, and this is shooting film, one weekend I shot 3,500 photos in one weekend, which was a lot of work to go through, I can tell you. But, you know, I was obsessed with getting better. But back then, of course, you know, shooting film, it was hugely expensive. And as a kid, I had limited resources, of course, and my parents weren't prepared to fund my photography obsession, so I had to earn money. Fortunately, we lived close to a golf course, so I would go walking the perimeter on weekends and collecting golf balls that had gone over the fence, clean them up, and I would sell them to other golfers on the course, or I'd sell them back to the pro shop. I made things in the shed and sold them to the neighbours, and then as I got a bit older, I took photos for local real estate agents of homes for sale and sold those. So whatever I needed to do, I did to both improve my craft and practice my craft over and over and over again. So essentially my evolution from frustrated amateur to reasonably competent professional, I think boiled down to 5 things. So the first thing was I studied and tried to emulate some of the best at the time, the ones that I most respect, and I'm talking about people like Ansel Adams, Henri Cartier-Bresson, Irving Penn, David Bailey, Helmut Mueller, people like this. And this is across multiple genres. And the photographs that appeared in British Car magazine, that sort of stuff. So across portraiture, landscape, automotive, I studied all these guys. I devoured photography magazines. I tried to copy some photos, you know. I was obsessed with getting good at photography. I couldn't sleep at night. That's all I could think about. So the second thing was, which leads from that, of course, is I practiced and practiced and practiced. I photographed everything, still lifes, macros, action shots, landscapes, portraits, anything I could get my hands on, anything I could point my camera at, I tried. The third thing that really had an impact on the quality of my photos, I think just came with maturity, and that was I learned to slow down and really evaluate my scene, to not be in a rush to get a result. When you're shooting professionally, there's always time pressures, but if you're an amateur photographer, if you're somebody who shoots for the pure pleasure of it, or you're not a pro who's on assignment, you're shooting professionally but you're selling your own images, then there is great value in slowing down, walking around your scene, just enjoying the environment first and foremost, because if you don't enjoy where you are and what you're looking at and you can't immerse yourself in it, it's very hard to get photos that really reflect the feeling of being there. I think some of the best photographs and some of the best photographers are those who really immerse themselves in their environment, and it's obvious in their images that they love the environment that they're shooting in. They love the outdoors. I'd say the vast majority of photographers that I follow on YouTube are the ones that genuinely enjoy what they do, and they really love being outside. Part of slowing down and settling into the environment is walking around, looking at it from different angles, get down low, get up higher, get in elevated position, crawl up on rocks, walk around the scene and observe it from different angles. It can make a huge difference. And oftentimes what you thought was an obvious scene to photograph can be captured far better from a slightly different angle. The fourth thing that I learned was that my camera does not see what I see. We see things three-dimensionally. We also have the benefit of smell and sound and the temperature on our skin, the breeze. We have lots of other sensory inputs which augment what we see and create a feeling for what we see, but the camera doesn't see any of that. The camera records everything two-dimensionally. And so it becomes a two-edged sword. It becomes a hindrance and a benefit. It's a hindrance in the sense that we need to start seeing things, or we need to really look at things the way the camera sees it. And I think this only comes with practice and comes with time, is to really learn how to use focal lengths, depth of field, light direction, that sort of stuff, to amplify what the camera sees, to create the illusion of depth and to create the illusion of a third dimension. But likewise, there is also a benefit to the camera not seeing things the way we see things, because a camera has the benefit of being able to see in very dark conditions. A camera can record a 30-second or a 30-minute exposure and reveal things that we can't see with our eyes. Likewise, a camera can zoom into something at 400 millimeters and pluck out little elements and create the illusion of compressed perspective, which our eyes can't do. So once you start to see things the way a camera sees things, and I think that a lot of this involves spending more time looking through the viewfinder of your camera. So you train your mind to see things the way the camera sees it. Then you can look at a scene with your own eyes and you can actually visualize compositions out there which in the past you would not have seen with your own eyes. And the fifth thing was, I think, learning to strip away the complexity and see things like a child sees things. To remember that despite the huge number of variables that we have at our disposal, whether it's lens, exposure settings, equipment, all the stuff, all the variables we have available to us, oftentimes the best images come from a very pure and almost childlike approach to it. I mean, some of the best photographs in history came from photographers who had rangefinder cameras with a fixed lens. We can get obsessed with all of the options that we have at our disposal, and yet if we just slap a single lens on our camera and go for a walk in the woods or a walk in the hills, oftentimes we can surprise ourselves with just how pure and innocent and beautiful our images can be. So although I suffer from gear acquisition syndrome as bad as anybody else, I am often forcing myself to go for a walk with just the one lens on my camera, albeit a zoom lens, but sometimes a prime lens as well, just to make me look at things in a cleaner, simpler, purer way. And I think that can produce better images a lot of the time. So I think the inescapable truth is this: unless we're blessed with a location close to home like the Dolomites or the Whitsundays, Banff National Park, the Scottish Highlands, the Lake District, Canadian Rockies, something like that, unless we have something like that at our doorstep, taking beautiful landscape images requires intention and patience and care. But as you step through the 5 tips that we've covered here, I think you'll find your photography, regardless of what you shoot, will improve dramatically. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for hanging out with me for a little while. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Really helps. And if you're not subscribed, I'd love to have you along. Anyway, I'll see you again next week. Bye.